Hi, and welcome to New Directions for Ecotherapy and Nature Wellness. This is part of the APA conference, and we're part of the APA Division 34. Today I'm joined by two of my esteemed colleagues to present more about ecotherapies and spending time in nature and impacts on mental health. So I'm Everly Jazzy. I'm just graduated from Ohio State University with my master's in environmental social science, and my advisor is Dr. Leah Deach. Um, I studied how nature and psychological well-being can be impacted um, by moderating factors and how these can lead to equity in mental health through nature and green space. Before I start, I just wanted to define some key terms. So green space is the term that I'm using for nature and natural spaces. And I've used this as an umbrella term of maintained and unmaintained natural areas. Psychological well-being is hedonic and eudaimonic terminologies that are put into a scale that determines well-being. And negative affect is negative emotions, in other words. So for benefits of nature, these have been recorded for almost 4 decades in the research field, and certainly longer in various communities. And research has found that the reduction of risk of anxiety, depression, other mental health issues, and also physical health issues can come from spending time in nature, green space. And Americans spend on average 90% of their day distance from the natural world. And this is why connection with nature and the benefits it can yield are very important to the current environment, especially during this pandemic. So something to also note is that access and use are not equal amongst various populations. 80.7% of Americans live in cities, and urban areas have less access to quality green space than rural areas. 74% of Americans of color and 70% of those living in low-income households live in nature-deprived areas, which have less access to vegetation and lower levels of tree coverage. So these are inequitable, as 23% of white individuals and 48% of those with moderate incomes have quality access to don't have quality access to natural areas, and that is a disparity to the over 70% of people of color and low-income households. So access is a barrier, and this needs to be considered when talking about nature and health research. On top of access issues, there are use disparities. So it's important to note that the literature has showed those who don't use their green space don't reap the benefits, and addressing barriers like trauma, stigma, use barriers like gear and various expenses, these all need to be considered in research and in increasing access and use to green space. With all of these differences, I wanted to look at the importance of familiarity in terms of green space, recreation, connection, and attachment to places in gaining access and having benefits from nature. Recently, there have been a lot of calls to look at determinants of health and narrowing gaps between the advantaged and disadvantaged or marginalized communities. These are very important to think about when looking at low socioeconomic status, people of color, all of these marginalized communities in America have bared the brunt of health issues and pandemics. And I focus specifically on mental health equity, and many of these groups have higher rates of severe depression, higher prevalence of psychological symptoms, and lower rates of diagnosis and access to psychological services. So because of the interconnection between access, use, and mental health disparities, I wanted to ask if gaining access to benefits from green space would lead to mental health equity through moderation of benefits based on access and previous familiarity or current use even, and then also socio-demographic groups. To do this, I ran a quasi-experiment with two 45-minute walks that participants went on with chosen routes. Because of coronavirus, I had to use this quasi-experimental design and I couldn't control for um, which walks they went on, what routes they went on. So instead, I controlled for perceptions of naturalness of walks and participants would rate their walks. So I had a summer sample in 2020 and also an autumn sample in 2020. And in these samples of undergraduate students, students of color, Pell Grant recipients, which is an indicator of low income, and first generation students were heavily incentivized because I did want to look at various groups of low SES and also people of color. I used pre and post test surveys for each walk, and participants filled out these surveys on Qualtrics while they were before and after they were walking. And as part of this, I measured nature connectedness with the environmental identity scale. These are items like I think of myself as a part of nature and not separate from it, or I feel refreshed when I spend time in nature. I also looked at the peer-reviewed psychological well-being scale, which looked at I'm dealing with problems well, or I'm interested in new things, and then also negative affect items from the positive and negative affect schedule. My hypotheses looked at three things. So I looked at whether nature matters. So did those who went on natural walks have even more benefits than those who went on less natural or built walks? I looked at if access and use mattered. So if those who had greater access and greater past and current use of natural spaces, if they had even more benefits. And then I was looking at this equitable aspect. So I wanted to see if once people were getting out on these repeated exposures to natural space, if they would have those who had less previous use and access and familiarity with green space, if they had even more benefits once they gained access to these. So that's where I'm looking at mental health equity. And I created a variable, like I said, to control for individual perceptions of naturalness, which got at if nature matters, if naturalness matters. And I had these participants as well as other participants who totaled over 1,000 participants rate 10 photos varying in naturalness on a 7-point bipolar scale. And then I calculated the average deviation each participant had from the overall average rating of the photos. And then I used this deviation from norm variables to control for their own ratings. I found that the reliability of these norm ratings was high, with averages for each photo being similar between the summer and the autumn sample. Participants were also asked to take a photo, which was representative of their walk. So in the top right-hand corner, you can see a very natural walk, and in the bottom middle, you can see a very built walk. And then I also found that most students did go on more built walks, with 2 out of 7 being the most common walk. For my 306 participants, the average age of participants was 22 years old, with most participants spending their entire lives in the state that the university was in. 73% were white, 73% were female, 65% were from suburban areas, and 76 were from middle or upper middle class. And for class, they did self-identify, so that is a future consideration for how students identify their own SES. The average score on the environmental identity scale was pretty skewed to high nature connectedness. It was a 4.02 out of 5 in environmental identity. So for my results, I ran stepwise regression models testing walk naturalness, familiarity and use, and then socio-demographic variables on my 5 dependent variables, which were pre and post test of well-being and of negative affect. I condensed some variables into a more parsimonious model because I did have so many independent variables. From my results, I found that in the second walk, those who reported going on more natural walks had significantly higher change in well-being from pre-walk 2 to post-walk 2. So that was interesting that the repeat exposure had that effect. Childhood fishing and environmental identity both had significant positive relationships with changes in well-being. And the equitable part of this was inconclusive because the only significant finding I found was that social class had a negative effect. As class increased, there was a decline in well-being. So for my discussion, I think that repeat exposure is necessary to continue looking at. Some experiments only do one intervention, but I think having multiple walks or multiple interventions in green space would allow for the significant findings that I found to continue to be analyzed. And also the role of use was very interesting. And in my study, the university that I selected to have participants participate from was very fishing heavy. So perhaps fishing was tied to that university landscape. And I'd be interested to see if other types of recreation or other frequencies of recreation would yield significant findings as well. And also this unique tie with socioeconomic status with the class finding in the last results section for hypothesis 3, I think would be interesting to look at because there have been other studies that have been of epidemiological nature and look at how low SES, individuals of low SES background can find health equity or benefits for mortality from green space. So that would be interesting to analyze further. And that is my presentation. I'm going to allow Lindsay to go next.
Hello everyone, my name is Lindsay Wheeler and I'm going to be presenting research that was conducted by myself and Dr. Stephen R. Weininger at Western Kentucky University entitled The Effects of Outdoor Therapy on Depression and Anxiety, a Quantitative Review. So I wanted to begin by sharing the definition of outdoor therapy that we used on this project, which was derived from Ravel's definition in her 2013 article, Helpful Aspects of Outdoor Therapy Experiences in Online Preliminary Investigation. Our definition of outdoor therapy is the use of outdoor activities for therapeutic benefits, including both wilderness therapy and adventure therapy. Outdoor therapy is currently being used to treat a variety of different psychological conditions, including PTSD, addiction, and learning disorders. But for this project, we focused specifically on depression and anxiety. There are a variety of different activities used in outdoor therapy. Some of the more common ones are walking, hiking, camping, rock climbing, and horseback riding. There are tons of different possibilities, and your options will typically depend on which program you choose, where it's located, and the time of year. So this brings me to a key point here that outdoor therapy programs vary significantly in type of outdoor activity, duration, therapy modality, and intervention type. And while there are many studies that look at the effectiveness of outdoor therapy on psychological outcomes, we identified a lack of research that investigated moderators such as age, intervention type, and intervention duration. So our research questions were: 1, how effective is outdoor therapy at reducing depression and anxiety symptoms? And 2, does effectiveness of treatment vary across the following moderators: intervention type, intervention duration, participant age, and measurement type? So to break down these moderators a little bit, intervention type refers to whether or not participants were in an immersive program where they lived at the location of their program for the entire duration, or if it was part-time and patients returned home between sessions. Intervention duration refers to the total length of the program, and we broke that down into 2 categories: less than 2 months and 2 to 4 months. We had 2 participant age categories, adult and adolescent, and measurement type, which refers to whether the studies either directly measured depression or anxiety, or if their measurements indirectly measure depression or anxiety through like a relevant subscale. We began by conducting a literature review using the databases APA Psych Info, APA Psych Articles, Psychology and Behavioral Sciences Collection, Sport Discus. After refining our results to only include peer review academic articles, we had 127 possible articles. We ended up excluding 121 of those articles for either not pertaining to outdoor therapy, not reporting data relevant to depression or anxiety, or participants not being adolescents or adults. And that left us with a total of 6 studies to use in our analysis. These 6 studies contained a combined total of 1,294 participants. Those were adults and adolescents who completed some outdoor therapy program. We then proceeded to calculate Cohen's d for all of the study outcomes and investigated moderators through our quantitative synthesis. Moving on to the results, we found that the effects of outdoor therapy were greater for anxiety than depression. And within those anxiety results, we found that the average effect size was greater for adolescents than adults, and treatments 2 to 4 months in duration had greater reductions in anxiety symptoms than those treatments that were 0 to 2 months. Anxiety effect sizes were also greater for those in an immersive treatment compared to those who were in a part-time treatment program. So in conclusion, the results of this quantitative review suggest that outdoor therapy is a more effective treatment for anxiety than depression. The results offer us insights with regard to potential moderators such as age, length of treatment, and not only is outdoor therapy more effective at reducing anxiety in adolescents than adults, but it's more effective if the treatment is 2 to 4 months rather than less than 2 months, and if it's an immersive treatment compared to a part-time treatment. So I also just wanted to touch on some of the limitations. Although we had over 1,200 participants, those participants were only acquired from 6 studies and therefore 6 outdoor therapy programs, which isn't necessarily representative of all outdoor therapy programs. There was also not enough data to include type of outdoor activity as a moderator. And investigating potential differences in the effectiveness of different outdoor activities as a treatment, especially across various populations, would be a really great direction for future research. Perhaps certain outdoor activities would be more effective at treating some psychological conditions rather than others. It would also be really great to identify other possible moderators, things like socioeconomic status, physical health, connections to nature, or phobias that might be triggered via outdoor activities could be really significant factors as well. And understanding how these outdoor therapy activities could really, how these outdoor therapy activities work could really help shape truly effective and accessible programs. So sorry, I skipped forward. So based on our findings, outdoor therapy programs might be better suited to treat adolescents than adults and anxiety rather than depression. And this is something that practitioners might want to consider when prescribing outdoor therapy. And this concludes my section of the presentation. I really appreciate your time. And if anyone has any questions, please feel free to reach out to either myself or Dr. Weininger, and I'll pass things over to Rose Evelyn.
Thank you, Everly and Jazzy, for sharing your important research on efficacy, accessibility, and equity of ecotherapy. My name is Rose Evelyn Friedheim, and I'm a certified ecotherapist and a doctoral student completing my PsyD at the Wray Institute this fall. I'm grateful to have completed my research with Drs. Katie McGovern and Dr. Sydney Yu. Thank you for being here today and participating in the conversations on the future of ecotherapy and nature wellness. My dissertation is titled Nature as a Co-Therapist, Ethical Challenges and Solutions of Psychologists Practicing Ecotherapy. This research began in response to the current gap in ecopsychology literature regarding the ethical ramifications of moving treatment outdoors. Previous ecotherapists have called for developing research-informed guidelines for outdoor treatment. The current lack of an ethical framework for outdoor treatment poses the threat of unintentional, unethical practices and harmful misconduct. This is the first study aiming to directly and thoroughly understand the ethical considerations faced by licensed psychologists practicing outdoor ecotherapy while adhering to the APA Code of Ethics. May this symposium spark further engagement and commitment to intentional best practices of outdoor ecotherapy. The participants in our study: 10 licensed psychologists across the United States, from Florida to Hawaii, participated in extensive interviews for my qualitative research. Each psychologist provided direct contextual accounts for the circumstances of their outdoor ecotherapy practices. These included a residential outdoor behavioral health program for adolescents, a publicly funded court-ordered program for adolescents providing extended trips, family play therapy in the community, a community clinic for children, veterans administrative group practices, a variety of different private practices for both children and adult clients offered both individually and in groups. These psychologists spoke to the complex challenges they navigated during outdoor ecotherapy while complying with the existing ethical parameters and the solutions they've pioneered. Their outdoor work marks a tremendous contribution toward making outdoor ecotherapy accessible to the complex, varying needs of each client's cultural identity, mapping the physical, financial, and cultural obstacles faced while practicing outdoor ecotherapy, and proving those concerns are not insurmountable. The complete data set of ethical domains. In designing the research and the interviews, 16 domains of ethical considerations emerged from a review of the existing literature combined with the existing APA 2017 ethical domains. Those in bold will be expanded further in this symposium. Minimum training, respectful integration, informed consent, screening, not pushing a nature agenda, efficacy, payment, reciprocity, changes to the therapeutic frame, confidentiality, recording, accessibility, assessment, treatment planning, avoiding harm, documentation, and liability insurance. Each domain was explored in depth during the semi-structured interviews, and the complete data set and each psychologist's corresponding narratives are included in the recently published dissertation. If you'll send me an email, I'll send you my dissertation. Today, I'll be presenting a particular subset of the dissertation result findings, focusing on the critical measures of accountability: not pushing a nature agenda, respectful integration, accessibility, and reciprocity. These ethical domains will be explored in the context of the APA Code of Ethics next in this symposium. Not pushing a nature agenda. The ethical domain, not pushing a nature agenda, asserts the responsibility of psychologists to avoid personal preference and bias while offering outdoor ecotherapy, to prevent unwarranted coercion of a client to consent to outdoor treatments, should that not be their ideal or preferred treatment modality. Participants spoke to the challenge to not push a nature agenda when outdoor treatments is a practitioner or program's sole area of expertise with no other alternatives to offer. For example, outdoor residential modalities inevitably push a nature agenda as their programs are nature-centered by design. Respectful integration. Ecopsychology currently attracts and is made available primarily to white academics and clinicians. Nevertheless, many ecotherapists employ practices from indigenous cultures and traditions foreign from their own, often lacking acknowledgement or appreciation to their origins. The misappropriation of indigenous traditions is an ethical realm focusing on political and cultural sensitivity, cautioning ecotherapists to take measures and to show utmost respect and accountability when integrating an indigenous practice. A minority of the participants raised the challenge of ensuring and enforcing proper training to avoid unintentional misappropriation in ecotherapy, and ultimately that some clinicians may be oblivious to the harm of cultural misappropriation. Consistent with the previous research in ecotherapy literature, my study's participants roundly acknowledged the concern of entry barriers for clients of varying cultural, physical, financial, and psychological aptitudes, which could result in ecotherapy treatment only being accessible to clients who meet specific criteria and unavailable to the rest. Thus, the domain accessibility is an important factor for us to explore further. This may be a misconception that ecotherapy is inaccessible, and thus we'll explore that next. Many participants in this research insisted that barriers are not unsurmountable, but instead require adequate forethought. Financial barriers, however, remains a glaring impediment because insurance companies have not consistently guaranteed reimbursement for outdoor treatments. Reciprocity. Dr. Canner, one of the founders of ecotherapy, explained, Western psychology views the exchange for services through a narrow lens, solely considering the exchange from a client to the clinician for the services rendered. Given that the practice of outdoor ecotherapy invites nature, as Hodgebach explains, to, quote, become a partner in the therapeutic process, quote, this use of nature's intrinsic value holds ecotherapy clinicians and clients responsible for preserving nature in exchange for its benefits. In an interview during the design of the study, Dr. Canner emphasized, I want people to have a sense of responsibility to the earth. Integration with the new ethical principles of the APA 2020. In late July 2020, the current APA Ethics Code Task Force proposed online updates specific to the principles pertaining to the APA's foundational aspirations in guiding psychologists' ethical best practices. These revised principles were available during the comment period, but were subsequently removed as the task force began its deliberations. Both this dissertation and the new updates to the Code of Ethics encourage psychologists to nurture a sustainable relationship between their clients and the natural environment, fostering an interconnected and reciprocal relationship between humans and nature. Revised principle, beneficence and non-maleficence. The task force document encourages psychologists to be mindful of how their values and culture might influence their actions and interpretations, to avoid harming other persons from different cultures or social contexts, and to strive to ensure that they do not misuse their professional services. The study's participants spoke to the principle when they agreed that, from the start of treatment, ecotherapists must maintain focus on their clients' needs in determining the appropriateness of ecotherapy, ensuring a client-centric approach, to not push a nature agenda. A majority of the psychologists wait for their clients to display a sincere interest before moving the treatment outside, or by gently introducing outdoor ecotherapy as an option and waiting to see if their clients respond enthusiastically. The task force also urges psychologists to, quote, be responsible to their professional decision-making, sensitive to power differences and factors that might lead to the misuse of their influence, and in addressing conflicts to attempt resolutions that avoid or minimize harm. Participants spoke to the inherent risk of misappropriation when ecotherapy treatments implement Indigenous practices. Participants suggested that ecotherapists consult within the Indigenous communities whose practices they wish to integrate. Recommendation for supervision and training were also offered to ensure that clinicians do not misrepresent themselves and to strengthen the understanding of the Indigenous culture's practice origins. The study's participants encouraged clinicians to bring attention to the traditions of each client's unique heritage by helping them center their own culture in their treatment, and by taking time to explore their history and their own ancestral traditions. Human and civil rights. The task force document encourages psychologists to, quote, promote and respect and promote equity, diversity, and inclusion for all humans through the application of psychological science. With the aspiration to promote equity, the participants offered solutions to ensure physical accessibility. Most participants promoted inclusion by having multiple outdoor location options at any given time. Additional solutions included following the client's lead on their preferred route and pace, and consulting with third parties to ensure accessibility and for counsel to plan for ideal routes and procedures. Given the misconception that outdoor ecotherapy is only accessible to non-disabled clients, more research would be helpful to provide additional solutions to promote physical accessibility. To overcome financial barriers, psychologists in this study billed to insurance when possible. Some only billed for part of the treatment or offered their outdoor treatment pro bono. And those working within residential programs have implemented innovative methods to diversify their funding sources through donations, scholarships, and grants. Integrity. The task force document urges psychologists to, quote, embrace the advancement of social justice and the maintenance of public confidence in the discipline of psychology, to act with integrity and endeavor to build trust through the development of cultural competence and cultural humility, avoiding the intentional misrepresentation of fact. Participants address this principle through their aspirations towards ensuring respectful integration. Participants advised remaining client-centered was a solution for clinicians seeking to properly represent themselves. Additionally, to seek permission from a member of an Indigenous community prior to incorporating their practices, though it was also revealed that even the act of receiving approval can pose a conflict between the consenting individual and others from their community. Interrelatedness of people, systems, and the environment. The task force document recently asserted that, quote, psychologists understand that people and behavior are influenced by the environment and that they in turn can influence these contexts. This is the first time in any of APA's ethics code that the environment's role of contributing to treatment was addressed. Participants in this research offered relevant solutions for reciprocity between the client, the clinician, and the earth. The most considerable consensus was for building the client's awareness of their impact on the environment. Additionally, participants suggested to formally display reverence by asking the nature setting itself for permission before venturing into nature for ecotherapy, to focus on the client's interactions with the natural world, to prioritize gratitude and show positive regard to the natural environment, to educate their clients about leave no trace, to facilitate community outings designed as conservancy projects and community service projects, and to encourage their clients to practice reciprocity outside of treatment as well. It is hoped that as our clients become connected to the earth through ecopsychology, they are increasingly compelled to be a steward for it through reciprocity. Shamanistic counselor Dr. Leslie Gray, 1995, further encourages honoring and giving back to the Native Indigenous peoples who have bestowed their wisdom and healing practices, to ask the Indigenous communities directly what they need, and to be prepared to serve their needs as they define them. While participants in this research did not address this, future research could develop and incorporate ways of giving back to Indigenous communities. Professionalism and responsibility. The task force document guides psychologists to, quote, recognize their responsibility to collaborate with others from other disciplines to serve the best interests of with whom they work. Consistently, to ensure respectful integration, participants offered consensus to intentionally pursue relationships and training from Indigenous communities. Respect for the welfare of persons and peoples. The task force document stated, quote, because the survival of all living things is intricately tied to the environment, psychologists understand that relationship and seek, as appropriately, to apply their expertise to the improvement and sustainability of the environment. As previously noted, the participants offered solutions for respectful integration, not pushing a nature agenda, and reciprocity. Social justice. The task force document encourages psychologists to, quote, be intentional in their efforts to eliminate historical and contemporary barriers and institutional practices that impede equal access, and to promote resistance and resilience against those discriminatory societal behaviors that create and maintain inequities. Participants address the principle of social justice through their aspirations of cultural humility toward ensuring accessibility, though they did not address the significance of race as a factor of accessibility highlighted previously in the literature. Future directions. New directions for ecotherapy must commit to broadly ensuring the accessibility of outdoor treatments for clients from a diverse racial and cultural backgrounds. I propose the following future directions for ecopsychology and ecotherapy. Consideration of the obligation of ecopsychologists who treat diverse clientele. The implications for ecotherapy education, which has worked from a predominantly Western cultural approach. Awareness of potential biases within training. Curriculum development to prepare clinicians with adequate methods to appropriately represent themselves and their practices, and the avoidance of accidental cultural transgressions. A pinnacle goal for ecotherapy remains to develop specific ecotherapy guidelines to serve clients with various needs and diverse cultural backgrounds, to move towards ensuring accessibility for all. Conclusion. Increasing access to mental health services must be a priority across our world, as we have all been deeply impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic. Fortunately, the open-air outdoor ecotherapy modality meets our new set of safety standards, allowing clinicians to safely offer face-to-face therapy to clients outdoors. Thus, for the entire field of psychology, this moment represents a historic opportunity to recognize and implement the benefits of outdoor ecotherapy. The key for us practitioners will be to approach with an open mind and a commitment to accountability toward how we might implement outdoor ecotherapy ethically with an awareness of our professional obligations. I hope this research has shed light on ways for outdoor ecotherapy to continue in an accountable, respectful, and honorable way to ensure allyship to all peoples and to give voice to the breadth of ethical issues which have been raised, in hopes of sparking further engagement in the intentional ethical practices of outdoor ecotherapy. There is urgency to address the impact of racism and other diverse intersecting aspects of inequity in access to ecotherapy, so that ecotherapists don't continue with practices that exclude. Please refer to my dissertation for an even more exhaustive list of amazing references of providers who have contributed their experience and expertise. Completing this research and the way in which all three of our research has been received by the professional community has brought me a profound sense of hope for our collective commitment to the future of outdoor ecotherapy, and we are all very grateful for your time. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to our important research and furthering the conversations for new directions of ecotherapy. And thank you to Division 34 for inviting us. Please feel free to contact us individually to continue these important discussions. Again, my email is rosefriedheim@gmail.com.
Yeah, thank you guys. My email is lindsay.wheeler796@topper.wku.edu.
Thank you. My name is Everly Jazzy, and I will be going on to my PhD, but you can continue to email me at my Ohio State email at jazzy.1@osu.edu. Thanks so much.